Thank you very much for staying on until the very end. Just to put into very short context, our service is located within the City of Dublin Education and Training Board. You can see all the logos of all the departments that fund us. And like Hilary said, we've recently rebranded ourselves into the Youth and Education Service for Refugees and Migrants, which is a bit of a mouthful, and I'm still sort of struggling with it myself. I started working in 2001, which was really, we were seeing very large numbers of asylum seekers coming into the country and very large numbers of unaccompanied minors. I think one or two of the years we had about 200 unaccompanied minors per year coming into the country. That changed significantly over time, and we've really grown and developed and changed over the last 17 years or so. One thing in particular that changed in relation to unaccompanied minors around 2010 was the care system, whereby previously unaccompanied minors were living in hostel type accommodation with no on-site professional staff. That changed in 2001, and there were residential care units opened for unaccompanied minors. So we also then changed our response in terms of our education provision to unaccompanied minors. We were set up originally to work with unaccompanied minors, but over time, really only through word of mouth, through no sort of intentions on our side, we started working with other young people from migrants and refugee backgrounds that were here with their families. And really that was through word of mouth. And people had, heard about us through family or friends, and they sort of came to our door. And about 2 years ago, we received additional funding through Dormant Accounts funds to specifically also work with this target group. So we were able to extend our services, I suppose, officially and work with a wider group. We run, I suppose, a number of different interventions and programs. You can see them here. The two that I want to mention today are really the school support program and the migrant access program, and in particular the migrant access program. So I'll just briefly, I suppose, say we have, I'm a full-time manager, we have two youth workers, or 1.5, I suppose. We have a full-time coordinator for the migrant access program, and then we have, I think, about 10 part-time teachers that teach on our various programs. And we also have, I have to mention this, we have a large number of volunteers and student placements that are all part of the parcel, and we can do what we do through their support. The school support program is relatively new, and this is part of what we're doing through the Dormant Accounts funds, where we are going into the schools where there are, so this is all based in Dublin, where there are large numbers of migrants, and in particular where some of our students that we have worked with previously have gone on into mainstream school. And what we're trying to offer there, I suppose, is direct support to the young people that are there in terms of additional language support. And I mean additional language support to what they're already receiving in the school. And we're also working with one school in particular at the moment and doing a series of in-service training for all the teachers in the school, not just the language support teachers, how to support their refugee children, but really any children who have English as an additional language. So what I really want to talk about today is the Migrant Access Programme. And we mentioned earlier, is it appropriate for children to be in a pre-immersion programme, and for how long, and at what age, up to what age? And I mean, this is, I think, a question that we always struggle with internally. How should we be doing what we're doing? Would these children actually be better placed in a mainstream school? But I suppose I would argue that for most of the young people that come to our program, this is at least for a period of time, it's the right place for them to be. So this is what we do on the Access Programme. And again, to put it in the context of unaccompanied minors, the arrangement that we have with TUSLA was when they changed the care provision that all unaccompanied minors that come to Dublin, and the majority of them are in Dublin, would initially come to our Migrant Access Programme as an initial settling in period. And then depending on their circumstances, depending on their educational background, they will move on. So we work with all unaccompanied minors in Dublin, but we also work, like I said, with other young people now. So they get 20 hours a week class contact time, mostly English as an additional language, and maths and life skills and basic IT skills. We only really work with the young people who have very little or no English. So we try and get rid of them. We try and move them on when they have reached A2 on the Common European Framework for Reference of Languages. So often we will get referrals from schools, and we'll get a phone call from a school to say, we have students who have no English whatsoever, can they please go on to your access programme? And we do sort of working with schools where we can say, okay, well, they can come to us for maybe 8 to 10 weeks, and then they'll go back to the school. But what we often find is that the schools will send us young people that actually have a higher level of English than we can cater for, and then the students have that are on our programme. And we say, they go back to school, and that is the right place for them to be. We only work with absolute beginners. These are the subjects that we offer. We also do literacy support. The young people get either one-to-one or one sort of very, very small group support around the literacy needs. And we run a range of after-school activities, and I'll talk about that in a moment. We're open for 42 weeks a year, from September to the end of July. And we have a flexible intake and progression policy. So we're not tied to the enrolments year and the capitation grants that secondary schools are. We're funded differently. We're funded through further education, actually. So we don't have the issue of people having to be in by the 30th of September. But obviously, that means that we have people moving on all the time as well. People always ask me, how long on average does a young person or does a student stay with you? And there really isn't an average. I've tried to sort of look at it statistically. But for example, we might have unaccompanied minors with English language skills or with strong educational backgrounds. And really, they're just with us. We call them the 3 weekers. They're with us for that initial settling in period, and then hopefully their social worker, their care worker will find them a school, and they'll move on to that school. Or they might move on to a foster family and then move on to a school. At the other end, we have, and we're seeing that more in the last couple of years, we have students who have either never been to school before, are not literate in their first language, or have very, very disrupted levels of education. And these are 16, 17-year-olds. So they stay with us for longer. We have usually 3 or 4 groups that we can put them into, depending on their level. They're mixed age-wise. So we don't have the opportunity to sort of put all the 16, 17-year-olds together, and the younger ones, we mix them up age-wise because they're grouped into their level of English. We don't have our own centre. We're based in a youth service. We only have capacity for about 40 young people. Just in terms of some of the numbers, over the last couple of years, we've seen an increase in numbers of asylum seekers again, also numbers of unaccompanied minors coming into the country, and that's obviously reflected on our programme as well. So in the last academic year, we had 105 students. We had 76 boys and 29 girls. And last year, those were our top 5 countries. 2 years ago, we didn't have anybody from Eritrea. I think 4 years ago, we had predominantly Albanian boys, so it changes all the time. the group that we're working with at the moment, some of you might have heard of the Calais Special Project. Ireland's committed to bringing over up to 200 unaccompanied minors from initially from France, from what was called the Calais jungle. So we work very closely with TUSLA. When those young people come to Ireland, they come to our programme initially. They're no longer only coming from France, but also from other European countries. So that shifted the nationality mix a little bit. So that's where a lot of our Eritrean young people are coming from. Since September this year, we've had 40 young people go through our programme. I'm going to talk about assessment and intake, and as we've heard, we don't have an assessment toolkit. We have an assessment toolkit, I should say, that was developed a long time ago, but it's not something that is used very widely, and it's not something that we use. We, a couple of years ago, developed our preliminary needs assessment tool, which is really a can-do checklist. We ask the students to, if they can, and if we have it in their language, to sort of tell us what they can do in English. And there's a list of can-do statements. We also test their English. It's a very simple English test that we've developed ourselves. And like I said, we're only looking for students that have that low level of English. If they go beyond A2, then they're not part of the Access programme. We ask them questions, we sit down with them individually, and we try and find out as much as we can, either through themselves or through their family or their social worker, care worker, about their literacy and their first language and their previous schooling and education. And because over time the nationalities change, we're seeing increasingly in the last couple of years students who have come from very disrupted education backgrounds. I think I already said that. People often ask me, how do you, what's your curriculum? How do you manage that? And in the last couple of years, we have tried to put a framework on what it is that we do. And so we have what we call our competency framework. And really what we do is we have 4 core strands: speaking, listening, reading and writing, and 3 additional strands: language awareness, grammar and vocabulary. And those 7 strands, 7, yes, 7 strands are linked to the genres of communication as set out by the Department of Education in their senior cycle. So the language of information, the language of persuasion, language of argument and narration. And we use that as a framework under which we teach the competences. So the competences, I'll come to that in a minute. They're sort of over here on the right side. And for each skill, or for each strand, or for each type of language, we also have examples of the type of text that we work with a young person. And these are just examples here. There are many more. So that might be a letter, it might be an anecdote, it might be a short story, it might be a novel, depending on the student's ability. So I'm just going to show you an example of what some of our reading competencies look like. What I suggest, because I'm looking at the clock, is that if you'd like to know more about this, email me or give me a ring and we can talk about that. I'd just like to refer back to one thing one of the previous speakers mentioned, is about writing and putting pen to paper. And we find that, and obviously this is the case with language learning, that oral skills and listening skills and even reading skills develop much faster than writing skills. And essentially, we're trying to prepare them to go on into secondary school or into a different type of education. And we really try and focus as much as we can on their writing skills. And that might be literally holding a pen and putting that pen to paper, or it might be, I suppose we don't have that level on the Access programme, but in our school support programme, we would have the higher level where we're helping them to write essays or comparative essays and so on. We also have these other competences around language awareness, and again I just want to highlight down that orange section at the end, the learning to learn. We spend a lot of time, I suppose, teaching those skills that children that have gone through primary school in Ireland or in any country have learned. How to take notes from the board. If you have an exercise and you have words and you have pictures and you're meant to match them, what am I supposed to do with this worksheet? So a lot of our students wouldn't know what that means. So teaching them to do that, teaching them to come to school with a pen, to have their papers and put them back in a folder. I suppose we have to incorporate time into our lessons to give them the opportunity to learn how to behave and how to learn in a semi-structured, in a school environment. I think it's important to say that it's more than just language. We have, essentially I think though, the more than language comes down to building a relationship with the students and building a relationship with the young person. And I think we do that through everything else that we do on the programme, as well as teaching English and maths. One thing that I'd like to highlight here is that we have our 2 youth workers do life skills classes with them several times a week. And we also have a framework where we sort of list the themes and the topics that we cover in that, but it very much depends on who is in front of us. So I know the youth workers will often spend a lot of time looking at cultural communication, what is appropriate, body language, I suppose supporting the young people in interpreting the world that is around them, and what is appropriate behaviour to behave with girls. A lot of our boys would find that very difficult. How do I speak to this person? What is appropriate, what isn't? So our youth workers do a lot around that. We also link in with external agencies, and one of the things that I think has worked really well is that we link in with the local Garda station and the Gardaí, because again a lot of the students have come from countries where they've been afraid of the police. Some of the stories that we've heard about them being beaten and locked up are obviously horrendous. So what we're trying to do here is create a relationship that they know that they can go to the police if they're in trouble, and they are there to support them. And we also talk to them about their rights and responsibilities and about not getting in trouble with the law. We have a range of afternoon activities, sports, outdoor education, music, cooking. And 2 of the things that we do that I realise that we are isolating them, I suppose, from mainstream education for a certain period of time. So we have tried to make those links to mainstream services or mainstream schools. So there are 2 opportunities that we have there. We have a weekly language exchange programme with a local school where they go in and they talk to transition year students, they play games. And also intercultural activities with Scouting Ireland. And the reason for working with Scouting Ireland really was that we would hope that if they end up moving to Offaly or Waterford or Wexford or wherever, there is a local scouting group there, and through our contacts, if they wish to keep up that link, they'll be able to join the Scouts around the country. We work closely with the CDETB other services, so with the adult education, the community education, with guidance counselling, to some extent with our psychological service, and also with many of the external services. Briefly on progression, this is something that we struggle with. When is it appropriate for somebody to move on, and where do they move on to? We do provide, wherever they go on to, whether that's a school or whether it's, if they're 18, onto adult education provision, we provide the school with a report, an exit report, where really, again, we don't have an exit test or an exit assessment. It's based on teachers' observations, it's based on their work that the students have done during their time with us. And we pass that information on to the social workers, and that information feeds into their care plan. What we've been doing recently is we've been engaging with the Youth Reach and the community training centres around looking at what alternative provisions we can offer for those that are 16, 17, 18 and who before coming to Ireland hadn't had much schooling. That's quite new in the Dublin city area. I think it may not be that new around the country, but we're very excited to sort of have that as a progression route for some of our young people. And of course, with the right to work, that opens up the option for those that are still in the asylum system to go on to training courses that are funded through the Solace, the old FOSS system, as opposed to through the Department of Education system. How are we doing? We're 2 o'clock. Okay, I was asked to pull out what are some of our principles of good practice. And I think it's very hard for me to say what can work in a different setting. We have a very particular setting. We have the numbers. We don't have an issue around transport, some of these issues that exist around the country. But in a nutshell, I think there are 2 things. I think it's around the holistic approach, if you like, that it's very much about supporting the young person, not just with their language and their education, but through the work of the youth workers that also continue to work with them when they have left our access programme. We support them with their settling into Ireland. We continue to support them when they have moved into school. The other thing from this slide that I'd like to say is that the teachers that we have would have not necessarily have specific training. I mean, obviously they have English as a second language training, but they don't necessarily have a specific training around working with refugees. But they have all worked with refugees and asylum seekers over time, and we have from time to time brought in years ago, we used to do training with UNHCR, and we bring in people and we have conversations about what it means to work with refugees and what impact the migration experience can have on learning and education. And that's really my last point. I don't know, I think some of you were at the Symposium on Monday, and Professor Mina Fazel was talking about the importance of the post-migration experience and how that can often cause a second traumatic experience if you're not in a situation or an environment where you are supported and welcomed. And I think our access programme and schools in general have a very important role to play in supporting the well-being and the mental health for young refugees and migrants as well. And to be able to create that sense of belonging, and Madeleine was talking about a sense of place, that they have a place that is theirs and that they belong to, and that hopefully they can bring some of that with them when they move on into other education settings. That's it. Thank you very much.